Thank you very much. I appreciate all the attendees and all the people that are watching this at home, on YouTube, or on their phone, wherever. I want to share with you a brief story. I went to what people call New Zealand, but the indigenous people there called Aotearoa. They welcomed me, Maori people, when I was there. And I look forward to going there again. And about 2 years ago, when I was doing a show there, I had a chance to meet with a lot of people whose story of colonization, whose story of having their resources be exploited, mirrored what I had seen in Latin America, mirrored what I had seen in Africa, mirrored what I had seen in Central Asia, and mirrored what I had seen in the Middle East. But what affected me most is a thing that an elder said to me when we were sitting down, and I'll be very honest with you, because sometimes the only time you can tell the truth is even when it makes you look bad. But no, we were all, weed was never a gateway drug for me. So we were all celebrating after the show, and an elder came to me, I'm being honest with you. An elder came to me and he had this discussion. He goes, where do you live, brother? Because I told him that I was born in Hospital Militar de Lima in South America, in Peru. And he said, well, where do you live now? And I said, I live in Harlem, in New York City. Big metropolis, gigantic, artificial place. And he says to me, he leans over and he goes, you know what, young brother? And I said, what? He goes, the natural habitat of a human being is not a block of metal and concrete. And I sat there, and you know when you have those moments where you think it's an epiphany, and then you go home and you sit in your room and you're like, holy shit, I live in a block of metal and concrete. And in the morning when I realized that this wasn't some life-changing epiphany, but this was something that I was being conditioned for my entire life, I realized that we had to redefine what has already been redefined for us, and that is our humanity. Our humanity has been effectively redefined by those forces that have exploited our natural resources. And I'll just say that the number one way that it's been redefined is that we believe, or we're being fed the idea that the earth belongs to us rather than we belonging to the earth. I think something else that we've lost about our humanity is not just definitively termed to people of color's indigenous background. But if you look throughout history, before the rise of feudalism in Europe, you had lots of tribes in Europe which effectively had white people who were living with a profound respect for the earth, with a profound respect and understanding of the resources that they shared with the earth, and who believed that there was a difference in between electing a representative to represent them, whether it be a man or a woman within their tribal society of Celtic people or Picts, or having a leader that simply took over and assumed the powers of a living God over their society. And I found these things transcending racial lines, quote unquote racial lines, because we're one human race. I found these things transcending class lines. I found them deeply rooted in our human history. And I felt that it was important that we rediscover those things. And sometimes people mistake my mentioning of rediscovering that as an abandonment of modernity, an abandonment of technology. But the question then begs, have we become a technological terror ourselves? Are we civilized barbarians? Yes, we have a rover on Mars, right? We have a Hubble telescope taking pictures of all these things outside of our sphere, our solar system, and yet we still have no cure for the common cold. We still divide ourselves based on race. And being a person that works in a juvenile system and has worked in prison, I'll tell you that yes, we divide ourselves by race, even there, but we're all united by class. And when I tell the people that are in prison that, I say, well, you may divide yourselves that way, but if all of you had that $10 million lawyer, you wouldn't be here. Which always begs the question from a child in the program, well, what happens when we find a millionaire in prison? And I say, well, he's probably the guiltiest person there because he had a $10 million lawyer and he couldn't even beat the charges or buy his way out of it. I think what's also important is that we realize that the people who ruined our planet, the people who are consistently ruining the planet now, are not going to be the people who fix it. You know, they're going to... I think the only thing that's going to fix it is acknowledging the fact that before race, before religion, before gender, that we are human beings who have been conditioned to believe in a non-sustainable system. And what I mean by a non-sustainable system is, someone once made a joke to me, and they said that 67% of statistics are made up on the spot. And I really took that to heart. But something that really dawned on me is that what the propaganda machine won't tell us is that, realistically speaking, and this is something that should touch not just you, but your children and all the people that are coming behind you, whether they're your grandchildren, nieces, nephews, we've consumed almost 30% of the planet's resources in 100 years. This is not a sustainable system. The way that we've set it up now, I once said in one of my rhymes that capitalism and democracy are not synonymous. The idea that we can automatically attribute only a first world response, only a G8 response to somehow the climate change crisis is ridiculous. They're the ones that are primarily responsible for it. We just heard testimony from a lady who basically said that they've exposed themselves. They hardly need us to stand there with signs because every single action of theirs is in direct conflict with what it actually means to be a human being, to love one another, to look through the unnatural schisms that we've been forced to have. And one thing I want to mention about the way that exists in relation to a quote-unquote third world as opposed to the first world is that I don't want to offend anybody who may have a mental illness, but I just want to say that capitalism is schizophrenic by nature. And I want to explain what I mean by that. Is that usually when these gigantic conglomerates and corporations come to a country, they don't practice real capitalism. As a matter of fact, they're really just as afraid of what they deem as real capitalism as they are of socialism. They don't go there and set up a competitive market. That's not what their goal is. Their goal is to foment a monopoly, to foment something as close to a company store as they potentially can, to take advantage of a government that they know is lacking in the ability to process its own resources at a level that's not as wasteful as what they decide to inject in there. And by saying this and by exposing that, I have to say that the resource wars have already begun. And that's my premise for closing in this. To say that when we look at a land struggle, when we look at a religion, what's framed as a land struggle, what's framed as a religious struggle, throughout the course of what we see in the news cycle now, please always make sure that we educate our children to connect that to those resources that are associated with those areas. It's no secret that Afghanistan is rife with resources. The Russians knew that when they invaded. The Americans, the British knew when they invaded, and the Americans obviously knew when they invaded. They were trying to take advantage of those resources more than they cared about liberating those people. Why? Because we had negotiations with that Taliban regime before 9/11, and the moral outrage that came of how they, quote-unquote, treated their own people came afterwards when we needed an excuse to be there and expand our I also also want to say that the United States government is not the only government that needs to be criticized here today. It is the puppet democracies of Latin America that sit there and say ridiculous things that you can find for yourself all over the internet. There was a recent struggle in the Amazon in Peru where you can find Alan Garcia, who was the president, say that the indigenous people, and this is a direct quote, are not first-class citizens. Whoa. Now, when you hear someone who's in charge of millions of people's lives, supposedly, say that the people who originate from that area, the indigenous people, some of which have not been mixed with Spaniards or mixed with other Europeans or mixed with Asian people or black people that have all come there in one form or another, when you tell them that they're an illegal human being in their own land, that they're lesser than other people, then you're pushing an agenda that we've already been conditioned to accept by default. And I feel like without confronting that on a daily basis, without saying that we refuse to have the argument reframed for us, that we refuse to simply put our political beliefs and our ideologies in an easy bake oven where they can then be formulated by someone else. That is the first step that I believe we have to take in this struggle. Also, I want to say something that we need to be proactive about our progressiveness. I know people that are progressive about everything except immigration. I know people that are progressive about everything except Palestine and Israel. I know people that are progressive about everything except gay rights. I think that we cannot afford to not be progressive about these issues of climate change, climate convergence, about a changing world. And also, I just want to say something about the nature of proactiveness. To make an example, if any of us walk out of this venue and you look up on top of every building, you'll see a water tower, right? It doesn't matter if it's in projects at Grant over in Harlem, where I used to live, or if you walk and you see some fancy building around here, you'll find a water tower sometimes. Now, if that water tower falls down tomorrow and smashes into someone and kills them, you know what's going to happen? You're going to have de Blasio on the news, you're going to have the governor, you're going to have a series of city councilmen that say, we need to launch an investigation into all these water towers to make sure that the kids of New York City are safe. But right now, right here, no one gives a crap about those water towers at all. No one even knows that they're there half the time, unless your water goes off. And realistically speaking, we cannot afford to not be proactive, to not make a preemptive strike instead of against a country that was not linked to Al-Qaeda at the time, that had nothing to do with 9/11. Our preemptive strike shouldn't have been against Iraq. It should have been against the companies that were making billions of dollars by looting this earth and by destroying the natural resources that we have. I want to thank you for your time and your patience with me. I appreciate learning from everyone and appreciate all the words of the esteemed colleagues that are here with me today. They asked me to end with a poem, so I'm going to end with a poem, a song I wrote called Sign of the Time. Imagine the word of God without religious groupies. Imagine the Savior, born in a Mexican hoopty, persecuted single mother in a modern manger. You crucify him again like a fucking stranger. Tears of the anger worth more than diamonds and rubies. Imagine being locked up since juvie. Imagine changing your life and still going out like Tukey. Imagine people talking shit when they never knew me. Imagine a movie that depicted the pain in your life like them kids in Afghanistan chasing a kite. For most of the world, that's what it's like. Imagine if the woman you're supposed to love for the rest of your life is set to marry someone else at the end of the night. They say you fight the greatest jihad in your heart and your mind. Fight the hardest when you stalk from behind. So I dream you impossible all the time. Fuck a Masonic design. America's future is mine. Repeat that to yourself. Because if our culture's a crime, them numbers tatted on your arm are out too far behind. They can only conquer you after they murder your mind. So rise up, mother, like the sign of the times. I feel my body weakening, but my spirit is fine. Ready to go to war with devils at the drop of a dime and fight with my rebel army until the stars are aligned. Cause Nostradamus was a white man's prophet who predicated European supremacist logic because the pilgrims and the conquistador columns killed more innocent people than Hitler and Stalin. So I guess the fortune teller skipped an antichrist or two. Brother, give this to the OGs doing life with you and pray for the problems with the Pope psychology so the Vatican will offer an apology. For what? For destroying the people's liberation theology, snatching the spirit of Jesus from people in poverty. Business decisions like keeping people in prison but had the opposite effect, incarcerating religion. That type of crooked politics exposed on the populace is obvious if you read the Northwood documents. So fuck the compliments for what I recorded and live for revolution instead of always dying for it. I love you.